Well, here we are at Taco Thursdays, and it's
Taco
June
Thursdays.
Taco Thursday, and
I'm
it's
liking it.
June 28th. Am I right? Yeah,
I think so.
I think I know what day it is. I know it's Thursday. Okay,
It's
that,
the
but you
27th, I think. It's the
okay,
27th.
you can have
We're,
whatever
we're a
week.
day off. That's all
Yeah,
right.
yeah, you can have whatever date you want. It is Thursday. We know that,
It
right?
is Thursday.
And I have my brother Mo Thomas. Mo and I go back a long time, and some great connections. Uh, Mo and I met each other on Facebook. We've never met personally, but we've interacted a lot on Facebook and on the phone. And several years ago, he reached out to me and said, "Would you review my book?" And I said, "Sure." And he sent me a copy of Into the Abyss, and I loved it. And I wrote a nice review on it, man. I tried to really give it juice because it's a really juicy book, all right?
Yeah, you did great. Thank you.
And a short time later, a guy named Paul Gray reached out to me. And Paul lives here in Lawrence, where I do. Now, here you are, Mo, in Detroit.
Hmm.
You connected me and Paul Gray. I'm on a call with them, that group. Paul passed, as you know,
Yes.
but the Zoom group goes on. I'm on it every Sunday, and I can credit that not with somebody in Lawrence reaching out to me, Lawrence, Kansas, but with Mo Thomas from Detroit putting me together. So that's how God connects people. But I really want to
I
talk.
love those. I love that connect. I love the way that those connections happened
And
organically,
I believe,
as it
by the way,
should.
I believe coincidence, Mo, is when God decides to remain anonymous. You know,
Exactly. That's exactly right.
you're an exceptional guy in that you're a very recognized engineer, got a very professional background, and what you write and the way you think reflects that. It, it, it's not mechanical by any stretch, but it reflects the depth of, of someone who has to think through the whole process and understand the intricacies and think about the cause and effect of all things combined, each independent thing and all things combined. And with that lead, let's talk a little bit about Into the Abyss.
Yeah, sure.
We can start out talking. You posted the other day. You talked about our connection with Christ, not our connection with sin. You want to elaborate on that a little bit?
I would love to. Let me add a qualifier. So I would say the engineering, analytical part of me, the left brain, um, is helpful when it comes to organizing and sort of needing data, research, all of that. But I am also learning over these last 10 years or so, sometimes you have to set that aside to let the right brain just play, come out and play, the childlike, creative, artistic. So, I play the piano. I love children's literature, Dr. Seuss and uh, Shel Silverstein and some of that. So those have influenced taking some of that organization and maybe gently setting it to the side and learning to be creative, which I always loved, but I didn't think I was allowed to. Engineers are very process driven and lots of data, pros and cons list, calculations, all of that. And I realized that was my approach to theology as well. Very carefully researched and a lot of deep dive digging. Um, but sometimes there's depth to what Jesus said and a simplicity when he told us that the kingdom belongs to the little children. You got to become a child and see with those innocent eyes, those wide-eyed, curious, open-hearted way of seeing the world. And that was new to me. I think it was always there, but it had been buried. And so the joy of writing for me, which led to the book about my faith journey, was a part of learning to write, combining of those uh, both of those halves, the left-brained research, scientific, organized portion, and then the poetry, which I sprinkle throughout and take a shot at what it might look like to think creatively and with new eyes, with childlike eyes, about the beauty that we see and how Christ influences that may be different than what we were taught growing up.
Jesus has an interesting way of getting us in our right mind, Mo.
Yes, he
And
does. Yes, he
I
does.
love to remind people. I get pointed out which sphere I come from, and I definitely come from the right side. And I love to point out that I'm the guy on the call that's in his right mind. So you're in your right mind tonight, Mo.
Finally. Yes.
Yeah, yeah.
So
So go ahead.
the idea of Into the Abyss, like many have probably said, we have a story of a faith journey that began in fundamentalist Christianity, in evangelical setting, and that's where I sent my roots down deep and was very passionate. Um, and when I started questioning that way later in life, I never was given permission to do that in my growing up years. So I became a passionate teacher, Bible beater, handed out tracts on the airplane where people were trapped. Chick tracts, probably. Oh my God. I apologize. Forgive me. Um, that was my background. I walked the straight and narrow and taught that way as well. Um, but fundamentally, I think what struck me as irreconcilable was when a friend asked me this question that his daughter had brought to him. Um, she had come to him. These are guys I had breakfast with every week, and she came to him and said, "Dad, how are we going to ever enjoy heaven if those that we love are going to be suffering excruciating pain and we're aware of it? How are we going to be able to enjoy this party?" And he gave the standard answer that I had heard all my life. But at that point, that canned answer just didn't resonate. It didn't do anything. And I couldn't shake that question. And so, in true engineering fashion, I went back and started looking at what how did this idea form? And so I have a lot of rabbit trails. Um, but the fundamental difference was where we started the story in the scriptures. Um, our narrative, our mainstream narrative, starts with a fallen, worthless, dirty, rotten sinner in Genesis chapter 3. We messed up. God is looking at us now with eyes of wrath. And the whole rest of the story is us trying to make up for that. And Jesus comes as the Savior to stand in between us and this wrath. And that's how the story unfolds. And, it's clean and it's packaged, and everyone that I knew and all the teachers that I had listened to taught from that perspective. We start the story with man as a sinner. Um, Well, my Bible also starts with a very different premise in Genesis 1 and 2. We are divine image bearers, brought into the community of Father, Son, and Spirit right at the beginning. I would suggest before the beginning, breathed into our nostrils the breath of life. So God's Spirit was basically our breath that brought man into the awareness of himself. Um, Well, if that's our starting point, then the whole unfolding of the story starts with man as an original divine image bearer, blessed and loved and unconditionally accepted. And even though we lost sight of that from our perspective, God never did. So when we change the starting point to Genesis 1 and 2 with with the blessing that God bestowed on us, then we lost sight of it, but now it's an awakening to what always was rather than fixing a problem that we created with our wrong perceptions or our distorted perceptions.
So we're
That might seem like a semantics difference,
no,
but it's night and day.
we're recovering. We're recovering from mistaken identity.
It's really an identity theft, isn't it?
Exactly. Exactly. It,
It was stolen from us
yeah.
because we believed the lie that the original starting point was separation, sin. We were reaching for something external that had already been deposited into us internally. And so, with that as the starting point, our original identity was stolen, and we're in process of trying to recover that through the course of the rest of the narrative as it unfolds.
You know, we don't need to recover it. We need to recognize it. Uh, and it's the most that is the most natural person we can be. Is that person, that Genesis 1 person.
Yeah, and
It,
you're absolutely right, Bob. This is really heretical in most evangelical settings, but our original identity is innocent, blameless, divine, accepted, unconditionally loved. All of those things are the truest, deepest part of us, and that never changes. What does change is our awareness, or as you said, our recognition of that. And that awakening really does something in the deepest part of us to um, cause in us a desire to live in a way that honors that true identity. So I've heard it said this way, um, is God's grace, does it allow you to do whatever you want to do? That's sort of a backhanded way of saying greasy grace. If we feel that way, then God just accepts anything we do. We don't have laws or regulations. Well, the reframe on that is when you really get a hold of how God sees us and you embrace that, you experience that at a deep level, well, your desires change. So yes, you are able to do whatever you want to do, but what you want to do changes.
you
In
realize that person that you really are, by the way, that person you
yes,
really are, just doesn't do those things.
they don't, and they see the harm that it causes yourself and other people, and you live in a way to honor the Father's desire, which is for a good creation, the creation that was in the beginning called good, and that we were given authority to steward with love and grace and compassion and generosity, all those things, to basically bring about the world that had always been imagined. Yeah, you don't do things that interfere with that dream when you come into the experience of your true identity.
I uh, I thought of an example earlier this morning, and I don't want to be too personal with myself, but Flo and I dated for about a year, and we got married, and we'd been married about 6 months. And one day, being a smart aleck, I said, "Baby, you've been married to me 6 months. Are you ecstatic?" And she very matter of factly said, "I want children." Well, we'd never talked about that ever.
Mm,
My father left when I was 3 years old. I had
mm,
determined I don't know how to be a dad. I mean, I know how to
mm,
be a father, but I don't know how to be a dad, right?
mm, mm-hmm,
And throughout our relationship, I've always enjoyed doing whatever she wanted. I get great pleasure out of giving her anything she wants, and I'm very fortunate and blessed that I sat her down one time and said, "Baby, would you like a big house? I can afford to build you one." She said, "I just have to clean it." I married this girl that's just doesn't take advantage of me. But I pushed back. I kind of pushed back here, and I was afraid.
mm.
About 4 years later, on Christmas Day of 1971, her mother cornered me in the kitchen and said, "Bob, when are you going to make me a grandmother?" Our daughter was born 9 months and 6 days after that. And here's what struck me this morning, real early this morning. The only thing that changed was my mind. We didn't do anything different. And obviously don't want to go
Yeah,
beyond,
yeah,
but
yeah, yeah.
nothing changed but my mind. Now, I'm not saying I can will a child into the world, but in this case, that's what happened. And I had
Hmm.
never really thought about it to that level. I've thought about the uniqueness of this situation, but I never thought about it to that level until real early this morning. And that's a teeny little example in my life of a much greater picture that you're painting about the power of us just deciding. See, by the way, I wasn't sure about how good a dad I'd be, but I knew if Flo was their mom, they'd come out really well, and they have, by the way. But
Did you
but
marry up, Bob? Did you marry up?
oh, totally. Flo's grandfather, 5 generations back, was Louis the XVI's cousin, and he got in trouble for dueling, and that was a capital offense in France in those days. But Louis didn't want to put his cousin down, so he said, "This Lafayette guy is going over to the colonies. Why don't you go with him?" I married royalty, buddy.
Yes, you did.
Totally married up, and
Oh, every time you talk about Flo, your eyes light up, which that's brings a deep inner smile to my heart. I
well,
love that.
God wanted Flo to have children. God wanted me to be a dad, and the only thing that changed on Christmas of 1971 was my mind,
Hmm.
and
Yeah.
that made me think then, how powerful is our mind when we really concede it to. By the way, biblical. It's not good to be fruitful and multiply. I mean, I was resisting. I wasn't a church kid at that guy at that time. I was out of the church, but still I was resisting a very natural law of man. I mean, good for everybody to have children. The species wouldn't exist if they didn't. And
I
um,
think the other thing related, Bob, that's a great story related to what you're saying is as you're describing the power of the mind, I think about those that have talked about creative visualization and the imagination we've been given as a gift. And I think we unlock the power of that when we combine the visualization, imagining it and embracing it in our minds, but then we also combine that with the emotions of feeling it at a deep level. So it's some of the wisdom teachers I've listened to call it heart-mind resonance. Dr. Kay Fairchild preaches on this, and some of the quantum physics folks talk about this. Heart-mind resonance is when your intellect and your thoughts align with your emotions, and you're able to visualize it and feel it. You unlock a power, and the universe just comes together to bring into manifestation those things that you are able to imagine and feel.
the power that Einstein saw in the clock.
Right. That's right.
Yeah,
You got it.
yeah. I interrupted you a little bit there, and I want you to go back to talking about what you were talking about. It was good.
Yeah. So, the reframe on where to start the story, um, it first started with me starting to intellectualize and do the research and give myself the possibility to nod my head that yeah, the scriptures start the story in Genesis 1, and something is off when we start with man as the recipient of God's wrath as opposed to man as the recipient of God's love. Um, one of these changes the way that the story unfolds. The choice of which way you go with the starting point completely changes the narrative. And so the left brain part of me had to rationalize that. And so I took some church history courses, went to seminary, I did some online work, and then just did a whole bunch of research. Um, that convinced me here. It took longer for my heart to catch up and feel the joy of starting the story in the very beginning. Um, and that journey really took me to the realm of science. You and I have talked about this many times. I've always been a student of the scriptures, but in the background, my real love was science. I've always loved, as an engineer, physics and astronomy. I loved all of that, and black holes were a fascination. Um, there was a time back in 2006. I remember it because it was the last weekend in January, 2006. I had really just gotten frustrated with the whole Christian narrative, and I felt God was letting me down. My life was falling apart. This was at home, this was at work, finances, relationships. It's just all going to pot. And I poured out my frustrations thinking God was responsible. He had broken his promise to bless me if I did all the right things. Um, so I walked away, stormed away like a little toddler. And thankfully, I stayed engaged with the scientific world, and God, knowing that, planted clues all through the universe that led me back to a childlike faith. But here's what I did, Bob. I think I may have shared this with you before. Here's what I did. Um, I said, I'm scrapping everything that I thought I knew about God, about the universe, about this whole story of mankind. I'm starting from scratch, and I'm going to sit like a toddler in front of a whiteboard, and I want you as the spirit to teach me. I didn't even know if God existed at that point in time. So as I scrapped it all, I basically hit the reset button. I'm starting from scratch.
Marvel
And
not.
what's that?
Marvel not that I say to you, you must be born again,
Yeah. Yeah.
starting at zero.
Yeah. I'm starting at zero. And he also said in that same exchange, trying to control the spirit is like trying to control the wind. You can't do it. You can only awaken to it and harness it, but you can't control it. And so my upbringing and my engineering mind wanted to control the story. And that was the maybe first glimpse of releasing that control and letting the spirit uh, sort of help me write the story in a reframed narrative. And that began just a joyful period where I had to start rethinking everything. I say joyful because it was exhilarating. Uh, it was also terrifying and disconcerting because I didn't know anyone else was thinking this way. As I was setting all this aside, I was alone. I didn't share it with folks. I put on a pretty good mask and played the game, but I was, uh, you know, floating in this liminal space, exhilarated because I knew there was something there, but just terrified that what if I have this wrong? What if I have the whole thing wrong? Um, Fortunately, uh, God, who is Abba, who is the source of all that is good, true, and beautiful, came alongside and um, guided me through all of that period into a much more robust, what I think is a much more robust, expansive, beautiful framework for the way I can now see the world. And that's what I tried to capture in the book that I wrote, Into the Abyss. It's really the intersection of science and spirituality with a little bit of psychology and neurology thrown in for how our mind processes information to really see that God wants us to live as we're designed, right? We resist that. We want to go our own way sometimes, but the best way is the way that we're designed. And when we find out our true design, and we feel it, not just acknowledge it, but we feel it, something deep within us awakens, like a child awakens on Christmas morning to something so beautiful, you know that you can never turn away. And that's what happened to me.
We really don't want in our soul to resist it. We've been taught to resist it because
And
we've been taught,
the
yes.
indoctrination says it's dangerous to think about anything other than the story that you've been told. That's dangerous.
And I would say to anybody that may hear this, if you're out there right now and you think you're by yourself, I'll remember what the Lord told Elijah. There's 7,000 that you know not of that haven't bowed their knee to Baal. Seven's the number of completion. There's
Yes.
1,000 times a complete number of people that are right where you are. You are not alone. Of course, my mother always said, "You and God's a majority," but you are not alone. You are not alone. There's a great, I won't call it a movement. Uh, in 2014, I called my friend Brian Zahn. I said, "Dude, what's going on?" And he said, "Come up, let's have coffee."
Hmm.
And he had gotten up in front of a group of about 150 evangelical pastors and said, "I'm packing my bags and leaving the evangelical movement." He said, "I'm packing my bags because there's some things there that are of value that I don't want to leave behind, but I'm out."
Hmm.
And I had awakened in the night that weekend, by the way, before he did that. And all of a sudden, I wasn't offended by things I was supposed to be offended by.
Hmm.
All of a sudden, I was comfortable with things I wasn't supposed to believe in. And I went to him and I said, "What's going on?" And he said, it's he said it's bigger than we can imagine. We should not try to name it. It'll go on longer than we will, but it's real. It's a story. It's a it's a continuing story, and we're beginning to understand it better. Well, BC's done an amazing job in the last few years in his writings and his preaching and so on and so forth, to really to really put to really put wheels on that. Uh, uh, but if you're out there right now and all of a sudden everything you've been taught from the pulpit and all your tradition is being shaken, and you think you're by yourself, you're not. You're not at all. First of all, Jesus will never leave you or forsake you, so you're good there, right? Goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life. That means God's got your back. And
He might just hunt you down like he did me.
and there are a whole lot of people, good people, who are realizing the same thing that you're realizing it. Because the eyes of the Lord go to and fro throughout the earth, looking to show his strength to men whose hearts are pure toward him. That's not a funeral scripture. That's a today scripture. Go
I
ahead. You
imagine, go ahead.
started talking about the science, and I've been on some calls with you when you talk about the astrology involved. And I was reminded today when I was thinking about this. There was some Persian astrologers a couple thousand years ago that learned about God from watching the stars, and you're a star guy.
I'm a star guy.
Yeah.
Those guys took it to heart, knew the seasons, and as tradition goes, followed this star and ended up finding this baby king.
I said astrologer, by the way. I should have said astronomer. Big difference. Forgive me.
Well, in that tradition, there was an overlap between astrology, which is reading signs from the stars, and astronomy, which was the study of the stars. In that tradition, there was an overlap where they were a little bit of both. They were scientists and they were also spiritualists that thought there was divine meaning in the stars. And I've looked at
Hmm.
some of the constellations where there's a pretty beautiful and complete gospel story written in the stars that is it's a compelling read and framework if you're not familiar. Um,
Hmm.
but regardless, there was a trust and they followed that instinct and it ended up being rewarded greatly.
the church leadership wasn't told, but those guys were. It fascinates me. The
Well,
religious were,
isn't that consistent with the whole um, narrative in the Gospels?
yes, yes.
The only ones who were severely threatened were the religious leaders who wanted to retain the rights as being God's only favored ones. And Jesus made a point of making the outsiders the heroes of all his stories, his interactions, etc. So he wasn't just, the confrontation was for a very specific purpose. God is looking for everyone to come into the awareness of their original and true identity from God's perspective. And so one of the passages that really spoke to me early on when I was looking at this was in Colossians, where it says all creation was created in Christ and is now held together and sustained. And so as I looked at what the modern quantum physicists were saying, this is since about 1920, and that discipline has really grown in the last 100 years. What they were saying is that the universe started with what they call a singularity.
Hmm.
Well, interestingly, the scriptures are using the very same theme and calling it Christ. The entire universe was created, held together, and sustained in Christ. Science is calling that the singularity, the origin of the universe. And so, as we think about that origin, that reframes the narrative to there was a time when all of us were connected intricately and entangled and in Christ and loved and accepted. So all of those themes didn't start at a point in history. It started before the story even began. And that really changes the way we understand the narrative. If we can really lock in that at the beginning, all of us in this singularity were in Christ. And so as the story starts to unfold from there, uh, nothing changes. All that changes were the introduction of time and space. But the universe is still held together, sustained, will always be in Christ,
In the
which
beginning
means
was the
that
word.
every subatomic particle across the entire universe is filled with the overflowing presence of God.
Wow,
Every subatomic
wow.
particle. There is no place that God is not. So the idea, Bob, we've also talked about this many times in conversations where we've been together. The idea of separation was the original lie held out in Genesis chapter 3. Because you're separated, you need to reach for something externally to make something true. Without that lie of separation, what you have is, like in The Wizard of Oz, what they journeyed for that entire time and through all the obstacles and challenges and met the wizard, what they found was all that they were striving for, all that they went on that long journey for. The only thing that wizard could do is show them that it was already inside them. What they were searching for was already in them, right? And Kansas is close to home. That's the origin of that story, right? So home isn't some future destination out there. Home is here. And it's always been there. And the only lie that um, got us off track and now has 1,000 corollaries was you're separated, you're dirty, you're worthless, God's wrath is on you. That's where the story begins. Science is just backing what the revelation that Saul got, later Paul, when he fell off his high horse, spent 3 years alone in the Arabian desert, letting the Spirit reframe his whole narrative. He got this revelation. The starting point of the story is not as I thought it was. And it changed his whole theology. I think he still had a lot of Judaism in him, and it was evident in some of the letters, but Colossians 1 I think, is one of the times where he just got a blast of revelation from above, and he he shared a truth that modern science is now confirming, both theoretical and with experiments, that our birthplace is God. Bob, that's our birthplace. That's our home.
So much here, and so important that we just allow the needle to come back to true north, if you will. Just and we've been taught that we have to do this work or that work or go through this routine or that routine or this process or that process for that to happen. When in reality, what we have to do, all we need to do, what we get to do
Yeah. What we have the honor of doing.
is just be who we are. Just be who we are. I, because every one of us is made just as we are according to his good pleasure for such a time as this, by the way. Right now, we not only are right, but we're in the right place at the right time. What's the 7 R's? Do the right thing at the right time with the right people for the right reason, and you'll never regret it for the rest of your life.
Love it.
The engineer that begged him not to shoot the Challenger and got fired for his record. That's a quote of his. Uh, and and so it's not an effort. It's a relief. It's 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 like when you lay down at night and you're still not quite getting there, and all of a sudden you realize all I need to do is let everything relax, and you sleep. I was on a call. I was in the hospital for 15 days back in December because I had surgery on my foot and they wouldn't let me come home. They didn't want me to walk on my foot. I wasn't sick for 15 days.
Mm.
I was on a call one evening, Matt Pindall and a bunch of people, and I said, a nurse walked in the room, and I said, guys, I'm going to break for a minute. One of my congregation just walked in. Once we know who we are, once we realize, once we allow ourselves to just say, you know what, I've got this. Way down inside me, I've got this. All of a sudden, we do exactly what Jesus did. We just do what Father tells us because it's the natural thing to do. We just reflect the Father, and it literally, it's the best way to live life.
One of the profound results of seeing yourself that way is how that overflows into the way you see the world and other people. Um, so Jesus dropped into a culture that was heavily rules driven. It was external behavior management. And he proposed a new way. He lived out the truth of a new way of living, the way, the truth, and the life, right? And suggested that when you see yourself the way that God does, it's not soon after, it's not long after where you will start seeing other people in that same way. Those are folks that God loves, many whom have never been told that, never put it on the radar as a possibility, and are living in ways that are lesser stories than the one that they were designed to live. So it's not that they are sinners. That's a label that we've created to make ourselves feel better about not being a sinner. I think at the heart of sin is just having a distorted image of who God is and who we are. I think that's a simple definition of missing the mark in the way that we see God and therefore ourselves. So um, that was a big change, Bob, when I saw that Jesus came with a giant mirror rather than a giant checklist of whether we were, Santa's naughty or nice list. He came with a mirror to show us what the true human experience looked like, and showed us the dream of a transformed society with this as the basis. Um, I have a group that I meet with on Wednesdays. We do a whiteboard. There's no outline, no structure to it. People come and someone throws a thought on the board, and we just sort of dovetail from there. We let the spirit guide it. At the end of the time, we have a full whiteboard and our hearts are full. Yesterday, we talked about the movie The Lion King. Do you remember seeing that
Yes.
with little Simba and Mufasa the king, and Simba runs away um, because of betrayal by his uncle who wanted the throne, made Simba think that he had killed his father, and Scar had other dastardly plans. So Simba takes off and thinks he had ruined the family legacy, and he stays off. Um, and the scene that we focused on was the elder of the village that they were a part of goes out and hunts him down and eventually finds him, Rafiki the monkey. And he pulls Simba aside and he tells him, "Come here. You know, you think your father's gone. Come here. Look down here at this pool." And his first look was into this pool. He just sees his own reflection and says, "That's just me. I just see my own reflection." And Rafiki says this, and these are the two words that I think capture the essence of Jesus' entire ministry. He says, "Look harder, look harder." And he looks again and he starts seeing the image of his father. And Rafiki says, "He's in you. He's in you now." The next scene is there's this uh, image in the sky. He looks up and it's his dad talking, his dad's voice. And the essence of what he says is you got to go back and take your place as king, but you've forgotten who you are. And he ends with this: remember who you are. Remember who you are. And that echoes. And that got inside Simba, and that's what got him to go back and take his rightful place. So it wasn't someone telling him, here's what you have to do. Stop avoiding your responsibility, get your act together, and get back and do what you need to do. His well meaning girlfriend, Nala, tried to do that. But that wasn't it. That just reinforced the fear and the shame and the regret and the guilt, all of that just reinforced it. When you focus on the behavior, you will reinforce the fear and the shame that led to the behavior in the first place. Rafiki knew the way to get someone to respond and live out your destiny is to show them the truth of who they are. And the message, look harder, was how Jesus lived his life, and not just said it, but did it as he interacted with people, always looking under the behavior to what the behavior was communicating and underneath the surface to who they really were from God's perspective, and then told them, go off now and live that way. You don't have to live projecting the version that you think people are going to accept. You're accepted for who you are, just as you are, because you were created in the image of the divine. Now go live that way.
Jason Clark points out that, "Behold, my beloved Son, in whom I'm well pleased," was before Jesus started his ministry, not after. I
Exactly.
believe, by the way, on that day that John the Baptist looked up and saw his cousin coming and he knew who he was.
Yeah.
He'd known from the womb who he was.
Started
And I
kicking.
believe he said, "Here comes my cousin who's going to show us who we really are. He's going to show us who we really are." That didn't go over very well at the First Baptist of Nazareth, Mo,
Did
but
not.
but
Did not.
uh,
So that's an interesting question. At the First Baptist of Nazareth Church or the synagogue, what was it specifically that was so threatening about what Jesus was saying and doing? We often just kind of blow past this because, the Pharisees were rule followers and they wanted to control the narrative. But what was it? If Jesus was just hosting a church service once a week and kind of getting people to come together and worship and sing and hear a message, I don't think they would have bothered a lick. What threat is that really to what we're doing of just running a church service down the road at First Baptist of Nazareth? That's not what he was doing. He wasn't just trying to initiate a competing religion. He remained a Jew. He followed the traditions and the rituals with a massive reframe and tried to help them see that even their own traditions were pointing toward a greater, more ultimate reality that applied to everyone everywhere. So
he he participated famously in the Passover Seder on the Last Supper.
all of the seven feasts, he went religiously to all of them,
But
and yet
but the
each time he reframed them with things like, "You've heard it said, I say to you, this water that you are highlighting in this Feast of the Tabernacles, with the water portion of the ceremony, well, there's a living water that if you drink, fountains, springs will flow from your inner man." So there was always a reframe, even though he held to the traditions, he wasn't doing it to affirm that what they were doing up until that point was fine, patting them on the back and saying, "You go, boy, you
the,
go,
exa-
girl." It
the
was never
example of his
that.
the example of his ministry was not the Last Supper; it was the First Supper, and that was at Matthew's house. That was a Seder with sinners. Okay, so if you really
Yes.
want to go by example, there's a classic reframe. We and I absolutely respect the Last Supper, and I absolutely respect that tradition. But that's not the picture of his ministry he showed us. The picture of his ministry he showed us was the First Supper.
So again, we talked about this at the beginning. The threat from the religious folks who were controlling the narrative at the time
Hmm.
was this table that Jesus was setting was way too long and way too wide and way too expansive to allow for their model to continue. If he actually painted in people's imagination that this table actually had places and settings for everyone, then their model would implode. And they knew that the threat of their lifestyle being imploded by what Jesus was doing was such a severe threat that Luke 4, his very first sermon, they're trying to throw him off a cliff. Why? First sermon, because their way of living was being threatened by this wild carpenter with a message of hope and inclusion that just didn't fit the narrative and threatened the way of life and living their system required insiders and outsiders. His system said, no, the way I'm showing you is a win-win for everyone. There's
Losers.
no required losers in this model, in this way of living.
The Doobie Brothers are a great band, and
Yes.
something that I admire about them greatly. They do great music. But for example, they got two drummers. You know
Mm,
why they have two drummers?
no.
Because they were playing a gig one time, and there was a good drummer in the crowd. There was an extra set on the stage for another band to play later. They said, "Bro, why don't you come up and play with us?" And it sounded so good. They weren't threatened that, wait a minute, this guy's usurped. And by the way, the money gets split among the band. So when you add a player, everybody gets a little less money, right? Okay. But they said, this sounds great. And we're in it for the music. So stay with us. Their lead singer got laryngitis and couldn't make a gig, and they'd heard this Michael McDonald guy could sing.
Oh yeah.
And he played
Yes.
keys, and so they called McDonald, and he they he thought they just wanted somebody to come in and play keys on a gig or two. Well, it worked, so he stayed. So here you have this great big band, and it all works because it's not about the protecting the institution; it's about the music. And classically, they wrote and performed, listen to the music. It's about the music. And man, if another player comes along that can make the music better, let him in. We'll share because it's not about the institution. It's about the music.
Bob,
Classic example of Jesus.
I wonder if if the Doobie Brothers, beyond their knowing it at the time, were speaking of the universe, one verse song, the one song that's being played throughout the universe is the song of true identity.
Mm.
And anyone who wants to join in and sing along with that song, harmonize to it, sing melody, play the uh, guitar, or get a rhythm going on the drums, that one song, the universe, um, is, I think, what Jesus was trying to do with his life, is help people see that their invitation to join into this one song was eternal. That melody is playing in all of our hearts,
Yes.
and there is no threat. You don't need the threat of punishment when someone steps into and experiences how God has always seen them. It's a joyful uh, outflowing and desire to honor the one who exhibits that kind of love and honor and, really faith in us, God's faith in who God has created in the divine image to live out the divine life. We are each unique and necessary expressions of the divine.
And he wants us to express what we have. I tell this story all the time, so forgive me for repeating it, but wrote a bunch of music back about 30 years ago. Went through a 7-year period where I wrote about 70 songs.
Hmm.
They were songs. They weren't words and a melody that rhymed. They all had a message in them.
Hmm.
And one thing led to another, and some really good players started coming around me. And this one guy who is the most radical guitar player I've ever been around. And I've been around a lot of guitar players.
Hmm.
Guy named Greg Hawes. The first time we got together to rehearse, he said, "What do you want me to play on this tune, Bobby?" And I thought for a minute, that guy asked me what to play. Well, he was respecting it, me because of my song, right?
Hmm.
But what I said to him was, dude, if I tell you what to play on this song, the best we're going to get is the limit of my imagination.
Hmm.
Why don't you play what you hear? And if I don't like it, I'll let you know. Played with him for a decade. Biggest
Nice.
problem I ever had with his lead breaks, and I've heard a lot of lead breaks. He would do such phenomenal things in a lead break that I'd almost forget to come back in on the vocals. I'd get enamored with what he was playing.
Let's let him go solo for an extended time.
Well,
Get some
and
prog rock.
and there were two great lead players. I was acoustic rhythm in that band, man. I didn't don't give me an electric guitar. Just keep me quiet. Uh, there's another guy there, by the way, Carl Butler, who's he's a great left brain guy. I mean, he'll say to you, "You want me to play New Orleans blues, Memphis blues, St. Louis blues, or Chicago blues?" And then whatever you tell him, he'll play it. Um, those guys Again, I'd say to Carl, man, play what you hear. And so what happened then was those guys got together.
Mm,
Those guys got together and started playing off of each other. And
mm.
then I was really in trouble because then I'm thinking, wow, listen to that. Thinking, yeah, but you got vocals coming, man. You got to get with the gig here, you know. Um, that's a perfect example of quantum. Perfect example. Never told the drummer what I wanted to hear. The bass player wouldn't listen anyway. You know how bass players are. You know,
I do know how bass.
uh,
Uh,
but it worked,
yeah.
and it it took my creation, which would stand up with me sitting in front of a mic with an acoustic guitar. That's how I wrote it. I could sit anywhere and do any of those tunes that way, and they worked. But because people came around me and were allowed to be who they were musically, it just exploded. It
Yeah.
it just it just I mean it was amazing what happened musically. To me, I mean the songs were far better than I heard them when I wrote them. Okay, now we didn't. I didn't want to go to Nashville. I didn't want to do all that. I just wanted to do my music. Right? We played everywhere. We played in bars and prisons and churches and coffee houses and on the street. And favorite place to play was in a prison yard, by the way, uh, in prison yards. But I, it's like the Lord is saying to us, be yourself, Mo. Man, I made you right. You got licks in you that nobody else has got. And I literally believe, I said this earlier today, and I believe this. I believe the Lord once in a while will say, guys, look what Mo's doing. Listen to that. Look what Mo's doing right now. I'm almost losing my place here. I'm so infatuated with what Mo's doing. I I think the Lord is 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 totally blessed when we don't play what we're told to play, but when we're playing what we hear. By the way, if he doesn't like it, he'll let us know.
The other thing about being in a band like you were is sometimes we don't give ourselves the grace to recognize that about ourselves, and it takes someone else to point that out, right? A band member to ask you, why don't you start us off? And that's a trust. That's a trust in something that you've done that you might not recognize had someone. So that highlights to me a lot of times in our hyper individualized culture, the importance of living some of this out in community with those who know us, can help us identify our blind spots. We all have them. Um, and it's
What we
painful
ha-
sometimes seeing them, but they also help you come into the awareness and ability to live out um, the beautiful part of who you are.
what we have is opportunities to play that right part in that right spot.
Yeah.
And 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 I don't want to get off and talking about me all the time, but I used to have kids come to me and say, "Would you give me guitar lessons?" I'd say, "I don't know how." And they'd say, "How'd you learn to play?" And I said, "I played with better players." We you either get better or you get kicked out of the band, right? And I never got kicked out of a band, so
And you did it for a long time.
yeah, I did. And I kept getting around guys that played better than I did. Always, never want to be the smartest guy in the room, man. I kept getting around guys that played way better than I did. And what happened there was they pulled things out of me. I had to measure up to their level because I admired it so much, right? It was out of respect. And God puts around us. You're a classic example in my life of God putting someone around me that that you make me better because you pull you my respect for you causes me to reach down a little deeper. And and there's no shortage down there in either one of us, by the way. There's no shortage. It's not like we don't have another layer of depth because we're created. We have the DNA of God.
How are we ever so arrogant to think that we can ever plumb the depths of an infinite being? I don't know how we have framed the whole story like we've got it figured out. I always say this. It's it it's joyful to me knowing that at some point in the story, I don't know how it's gonna unfold. I have opinions, but however it's gonna unfold, that at some point we're gonna all find that we were gloriously wrong with things that we were so sure about. We just had a lock on the theology or this belief or this nuance or this is what this scripture means. Um, and it's not going to matter because it's going to just so exceed our expectations and our imagination that our collective jaws are just going to drop and we're just going to look around and say, just to have been included in the story is joy enough, and then we'll spend the rest of eternity, however you want to call it, plumbing the depths of the infinite.
In my experience, and I'm 79 years old, man. I got some years now, right?
Oh, I thought for sure it was 49.
Well, okay. I'm 49 with 30 years experience. Will you do
Got
that?
it.
Okay.
There
Yeah.
you go.
Um, I'm amazed how many things I did that I thought were mistakes that turned out to not be. How many situations that at the time appeared to be a failure
Hmm.
or a disappointment, and they weren't at all. Uh, I, I'd had a fight with a girl I was dating. I go to get her. We had this argument. I left her at her apartment. It was early in the evening. I'd shaved twice. I went by the sorority house, gave Flo's friend a ride. Flo came along. She sat in the middle, and when the girl got out, Flo didn't move over. Now, when I left that girl's apartment after we had an argument, I thought, bummer, right? I mean, this isn't good, you know. But look what was next. We're going to look back,
The
and
universe
that's
had
just
better things in store for you.
oh
And
yeah,
and
and I'm at a stage in my life where I look back, and I'm fascinated how many times what I thought didn't work really did work. Uh, One phrase we use in the negative is we talk about dodging a bullet, right? I mean, but but how many times I think what we're going to see at that time, whatever that time is, and it's not really a time, it's just another place in eternity, by the way. It's not measurable. But as we go forward, we're going to realize more and more and more and more that all of those things really work together for good.
yeah,
So were they a mistake? You know it by its fruit, right? And have I done things I'm ashamed of? Absolutely, I've done things I'm ashamed of. Um, I've seen great fruit come from those things. However, I've seen those things motivate me to do things that I never would have done. Uh, I won't I won't share the particulars, but one thing that just people were coming up to me saying, what's wrong?" I learned about something that had happened many years before in my life, and all of a sudden it was there and I was facing it. And the result of that situation caused me to preach the one time in a prison that I'd never preached in before.
Hmm.
And I told them, this is who I really am. And if God can forgive me for this is who I was, this is what I did. And if God can forgive me for this, he can forgive you for anything you've done. And 35 people responded.
Hmm.
And what I got was that situation vindicated. God takes the worst of us, makes it work. And I'm in deep water here, and I know I am, and I don't understand everything I'm saying here, but I know it. I know that at some point downstream we're going to think a lot of things we did wrong were really just part of the process of making us really, really right. The difference in a lump of coal and a diamond ring is the one with all the sparkles been through tougher things. It stood the heat, pressure, and all the tests of time. And because of all it's been through, it's beautiful and fine. Look at the stars, man. Go ahead. You start to say something.
No, I think you nailed it. We will look back and with a lot more grace than maybe we have for ourselves in the moment. I think about my youngest daughter who just graduated high school last week, had her ceremony, and thinking when she was first learning to walk, um, how did I respond as she was learning when she fell? Um, Certainly not with disgust or with what you would call wrath. It was knowing what she was capable of, picking her up and putting her back on her feet and letting her try again. And, you know, maybe the 43rd time was when she got it because she was designed to walk. And
And
so maybe looking back at our lives, some of the things that we see as just major screw ups are just learning to walk and falling, and God, with a wink in his eye and a smile in his heart, just picks us up and sets us up again, and so you got it. Might be 43 times, but I know what the design is. I know what I made you to do.
every time she fell down was an opportunity for you to reassure her and know her and show her how much you love her.
Yeah,
So here she is now, 17, 18 years later.
yeah, yep,
And she has never, ever in that whole period of time doubted that her daddy loved her and was right there for her.
yeah.
Because when she couldn't walk, he picked her up.
You said
So
something else, Bob. I wanted to hit on something else that you said. You talked about uh, fruit. Um, I've really thought in the last few years a lot about this idea of fruit because I recognize there was a period where I was rethinking my beliefs and I had changed some of my beliefs from the research I'd done and folks that I started to listen to, BZ, your friend Brian Zahn, among many others. By the way, I list Brian as one of the influences in a reframe of the way I saw the scriptures. Um,
right.
so I started to rethink some of these beliefs, and then over a few years, I started to lock down in a new camp called Grace and Inclusion, finished work, lift different labels. Um, and someone said this to me. I think it was from a Father Richard Rohr
Yes.
podcast, something to the effect of that he operated on the edge of the inside, which means you can't ever critique a system unless you leave the system and look back at it from the outside. Because if you're in it, you have so much at stake to protect your way of seeing it that others have to be doing it wrong, have to be seeing it wrong. So what I realized is I had gone from evangelical fundamentalism to progressive fundamentalism, and I held my beliefs the exact same way as I did back here, just with a new set of beliefs. And so this word fruit has really been important because in this new camp, I see a lot of folks with heavy criticism of those whose nuance of their theology, the language that they use, is somewhat unfamiliar. And so they immediately sort of put them into a lesser category that they're losing their faith. They are leaving the fold. Well, that's just like what I heard in evangelical circles. You are losing it. You are leading folks to hell. You are in dangerous territory. I'm hearing the same things after folks have left and now settled on a new set of beliefs. So I think now a healthy way to sort of assess personally as you reflect is what's the fruit of these beliefs? How does it change the way that you actually live? How do you treat and see other people who are different than you? What is your take on those who your group has castigated and excluded? And make it personal, like we talked about earlier. What about folks of color who've been oppressed? Can you see from behind their eyes? How about the LGBTQ community? Can you see the ways that they've been oppressed and reach out to them as included in the Father's love, or are they still sort of separate because of the behavior that you think it puts them on the outside? So we can gauge our beliefs fairly well as we look at the fruit. And I think that was really what Jesus showed so often. It's not really the beliefs themselves that determines the fruit. It's how you hold them. So I am learning, Bob, this is not something I've got, but I'm learning to hold my beliefs loosely because I know how many times they've changed in the last couple decades. I know they'll change again. So I'm never going to say that I'm locked into a correct set of beliefs or I'm using the right language or I have Colossians 1:15 and 16 nailed down with the interpretation among all the 41,000 denominations. That's not my take. My take is I want to learn to trust the rhythm of the spirit, the melody of grace, and sort of join into that song with my life and join that song and be open to uh, change the way that I see things as new things come my way, as the spirit puts new things on the whiteboard of my heart. Um, And one clear way is how do I treat people? Can I look behind the eyes of those who are different than me in their lived experience? I think that is a really clear discernment of the fruit of my beliefs, the things that I say are values to me. How do I see them in my heart of hearts? Not how I portray myself as politely accepting or tolerating, but can I actually celebrate God in them, the image that they bear of the divine? Is that in my core? Um, and people who know me well can look past the BS of pretending that I accept them because that's what my theology says that I have to do. I believe in inclusion. Underneath that is what I really believe and feel and think.
During that
What do
15
what do
days,
you think of that?
I spot on. During the 15 days I was in the hospital, I tested positive for COVID. I didn't have it bad, but
Mm-hmm.
it didn't matter, which meant everybody suited up every time they came in my room. Now,
Yeah.
they didn't put hazmat suits on, but they had paper suits on and masks and so on and so forth. And I'm sitting here thinking about the nurse that came in that evening, and I said, "Guys, I got to take a break." One of my congregation just walked in the door. I don't know what she looked like.
Mm.
I I have no memory of what I went 8 days not seeing a human face, except one night for some unexplainable reason. A nurse's aide took care of me, and when she got done, she pulled her mask off, came over, and hugged me. which was a
Hmm.
big deal, by the way. It was a huge deal. I
Yeah,
didn't ask,
sure it was.
and she did that spontaneously. I mean, it blew me away.
Yeah.
But in retrospect, I was given the opportunity to practice what you're talking about. I don't, I have no idea what that woman's spiritual background was. I don't know what her heritage was. I don't know what her nationality was. Well, she's American, but I don't know
Yeah.
what her heritage was at all. I don't know where her family. No, not now. I won't say that I've got that nailed, but at that moment, I had it nailed. More than I understand better what I had now that you said what you said than I have up till now about it, and that is that there's another person that you get to share the love of Jesus with, not by quoting a scripture necessarily, not by handing them a tract for the love of
Yep.
Pete.
Yep.
Just, Paul Young loves to say, "You're
And
included."
and and Bob, just sorry to
Yeah,
interrupt.
yeah,
Not to get them to do something.
yeah,
Now, I'm not befriending them or sharing that love
yeah,
in order to get them to say a prayer or do,
yeah.
change their behavior, or there's no other hidden motivation behind it. So it's not a bait and switch. It's just because God has been so good and is so good that that becomes an overflow naturally. It's organic.
You are representing to them that they have value. I can tell you that I knew
Exactly.
the name of every person that walked in my room.
Mm.
I knew their name, knew where they lived, knew where they went to school. When you start asking those questions, you're 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 adding value. You're telling people I'm really interested in you. And I didn't do that because I was trying to impress them. I did it because I was really interested in them. I mean, they were my people for 15 days, right?
They're
They were
your
the
people.
people. Yeah, they were the
They were
people
your
I was hanging with.
congregation.
Yeah, well, and they were my homeboys. I mean, that's who I was hanging with, right, for 15 days.
Sure.
So why wouldn't you want to know their name? I will tell you one other little story there. I, I don't know who decided it was a good idea to have have the lady come around and take blood at 4:30 in the morning, but that's how it works. And I'd had surgery on Monday. Middle of the night Tuesday, I'm kind of blue. Nurse came in and said, "How you doing?" I said, "Look, I want to couch this carefully because I don't want to get it written in my chart and all this, but so I got to tell you, I'm kind of blue." And I said, "I'm not depressed. I'm just blue." And she said, "Well, you did a great job. You're still coming down off the anesthetic, and you just had surgery, and it's natural, and so on and so forth." And she left the room. It's like 3 in the morning, right? She left the room. And I'm laying there in that hospital, dark hospital room, and I'm still feeling blue. And I said 4 times, "I need you, God."
Hmm. Hmm.
About 4:30 in the morning, a light came on, and this young lady comes in, and Mr. Eagle, need to take your blood, so on and so forth. And it occurred to me that she had done that before, but I'd never asked her name.
Hmm.
So she finished doing that, and I said, "By the way, you, you've treated me, you've taken care of me, you've awakened me at 4:30 in the morning, but I don't know your name. What's your name?" And she said, "Heaven." I said, "I beg your
Mhm.
pardon." And she said, "My name's Heaven." And I said, "I need to tell you something." And I told her what I just told you. She left the room. And then I thought, okay, I'm still coming down off anesthetic. It's the middle of the night. Did that really happen? And if I tell that story to my nurse, she is going to go back and write me up in the chart if it didn't really happen. Right? So I'm thinking this whole process
Might be
through.
there
And
another 15 days.
yeah, right. In a room with thick wallpaper,
Padded
right?
walls.
Yeah. But she came back in about 5:30, I don't remember. And I thought about how to do it. So I thought, well, I could be tactful. I said, "By the way, could you look at my chart and tell me the name of the young lady that came and took my blood?" She said, "Oh, her name's Heaven. I know her. Her name's Heaven." I said, "Then I need to tell you a story." It's everywhere, Mo. It's everywhere. And heaven walks in your room all the time.
Sure does.
Heaven checks you out at the grocery store. Heaven cuts you off at traffic.
Yeah.
uh, it's everywhere.
This is why, Bob, I feel so strongly about this not being an abstract idea of where we start the story and why it's so important. Because if we start with the singularity, all of us experience oneness before our human story begins, which means at our core, in our subconscious, our deepest memory is that we were one with God and one with each other. So when
And the
Jesus tells us to love God and love others as yourself, my take is that's a flashback to the singularity where we already experienced that. We've experienced love from God and the love of God in our deepest core, which overflows into love for others. We've experienced that before our human story began. And you know it when you see toddlers, when you see young kids, babies, as they just start getting to be toddlers, they have that unfiltered joy and curiosity and love, and they don't see the separation. They get the same haircut as their uh, friend who's a completely different color, and they think they're twins because or their clothes are the same, right? So that changes as we start entering the narrative of separation, which infiltrates every aspect of our society, religion, politics, education, three of the big ones. All of them are steeped in the idea of separation. So we are indoctrinated uh, 11 million bits of subconscious information every second that our body is taking in. And all of those are reinforcing the idea you are separate from that person. You are separate from God. You are separate from your true self. You have to project the version of yourself that you think people are going to like. You gotta
except
put on masks because no one can handle your real self, your authentic self. You gotta cover that up because there's lots to be ashamed of if people really know you. And Jesus says, let's flash back to the singularity. Let's start at the beginning and before the beginning, where you've already experienced what I'm talking to you about. It's in your subconscious, it's at your core. You have been loved extravagantly and you have experienced oneness. Loving others as yourself is loving others as yourself. We're one. And that is a beautiful place to start as a vision for our imagination to think and feel the experience. When we interact with folks, we are actually interacting with a part of us and a part of the divine, a unique expression of the divine. Now that changes so much in the infrastructure of our society that I think is the basis of a transformation. It's the vision that Jesus had that he showed us when he lived his life. It's not just about 1 week. He lived the vicarious life of all of humanity for the entire time, all of his interactions, all of his stories, the people he chose to be part of his crew, the women he elevated, the outsiders he embraced. All of that is for us to see that that's our story. That's not just the divine Jesus story off on a pedestal that we place him, easy to worship, much harder to follow. He
Richard
says,
Rohr.
mirror, mirror.
And he
This
said,
is your story.
and he said, greater, you'll do greater things than I did. We're empowered to do this. You, when you see him, you know him because you'll be like him. and that's not some far and beyond downstream. That's the Amazon guy that just drove by. That that's everybody around. They're, John Boast, my friend John Boast, likes to talk about the peace of God. It's PIECE.
Mm,
Yeah,
yeah.
and we are a piece of God. We're a facet. Uh, I was going to write a blog 10 or 12 years ago about on this rock I'll build my church, and I always envisioned this big block of granite, and the Lord said, no, 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 it's a diamond.
Mm,
It's got all these facets, and not only do each facet show light, but each person that sees that facet sees a little different light.
right.
Each facet reflects quantum reflections of light. Huh. Oneness, man. In the beginning was the Word. This is the brother that really seemed to get it. By the way, he lived into his 90s. He had time to really think about it. And he said, in the beginning was the Word. And the Word was with God, and the Word was God. All things, everything that was created by him. So it's all God given, man. It's all God ordained. It's everything is holy.
Peter Mayer.
Exactly. I love that
Yeah.
song.
Love that
Yeah.
song too.
Yeah.
And at the end of that section that you just referred to in the beginning was the word. Later it says, and that light was the light of all men. It shone in the midst of darkness. It cannot and will not be quenched.
There, Bromo, is a good place to stop
Yeah,
because you can't top that, can you?
you can't top that.
I mean, everything we've said up to this point comes to that point of light,
Yes.
that 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 laser.
Yeah.
Brother, I love you more than I know how to express it.
Yeah, I love you too. You've been the same encouragement that you said before, that I've been. Thank you for the kindness. Um, we first connected on the phone at a time where I was going through a really rough patch, and part
I
of
remember.
that encouragement that you gave me the hope and motivation to that uh, maybe I would be okay attempting to put my thoughts together into a book.
Really. Wow. That really blesses me, man.
Yeah, so thank you for that.
I had no idea.
Yeah,
That's
thank you for that.
well, keep being Mo, man.
Yeah, you keep being Bob.
Keep being Mo, and
Don't do like don't do like our brother James said in the first chapter of his letter. Don't be like one who looks in the mirror, this is a Message translation, and then 2 minutes later walks away and forgets what he just saw, forgets who he is. Be
well, I
one
got
who
to give
looks
you,
long, hard look in the mirror and walks away and remembers
and
who
I've got
he
to
is.
give you a paraphrase out of James that someone wrote that I think is precious.
Okay.
Forget what all the other letters say. Get off your ass and help people.
I love it.
I
Perfect.
love it. I love it. And
That cuts through the BS and gets to the heart of what it's all about. Love
exactly.
it. Thank you so much for having me on, Bob.
Oh
Let's do it
man,
again.
thanks
Let's
for
do it
being
again.
here. We will do it again, and this will be recorded. It is recorded, and we'll get it out, and we'll be surprised. I mean, who knows? Somebody may have a book in them, and they hear something we said, huh?
Here's to a taco after on a Taco Thursday.
By the way, tacos is an acronym. People were tossing that around; they weren't sure what it was, and I felt obligated. I'm an acronym guy, realizing, by the way, an acronym is an acronym for all characters representing or naming your message. Just um,
I had not heard that before.
well, it's original.
Nice.
I don't know anybody that one. That somebody challenged me one night, and it came right out of my mouth, and I thought that's pretty good. I'm going to keep it.
You got to
But
text that one to me. So
okay,
that's I might have to use that. That's good.
tacos.
Yeah.
Theo's always calling our spirit. By the way, that's been filtered by uh, Pope Taco himself, Jason Clark. So
Jason and
yeah,
Dub have
yeah,
given the okay on
they
that.
approve of that. Yeah,
Oh,
they've
beautiful.
that's gotten the blessing and the the holy the 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 holy salsa sprinkled on it and everything. So it's
Is it
good, right?
okay though if you actually go out and enjoy an actual physical taco along with
Oh
the
yeah,
acronym? Okay,
it's
perfect.
obligatory.
Perfect.
And
Obligatory. I love
and
it.
and I got to tell you, I mean, I'm pretty much in with that whole culture. I mean, I get the
Yeah.
senior discount. I'm
Oh,
just saying. I, so I'm telling you, I'm
you're
taco
all in.
extraordinaire here.
You're all in. Uh,
You be blessed, Mel.
you be blessed as well. Take care. Blessings to you.